What's going on, guys? Hey, Jim. Am I on now? Nope, not yet. Maybe. Oh, there we are. All right. What's going on, guys? Man, it feels good to be back here this morning. It's been a while. Not like here, but like here, like teaching. I fumble my way through announcements every other week, not like physically here, but like fumbling my way through a sermon. That I haven't done in a while. So this morning I want to go through Daniel chapter 3 with you guys. Most of you guys know it as the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Whenever I told Matt what I was going to be teaching during his absence, he said, "So you're doing Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and last year when we did this, you did Jonah." I said, "Yeah." He said, "So, we've got interlinears, we've got commentaries, we've got Bible dictionaries, we've got all kinds of resources. You're not just restricted to the VeggieTale catalog here." And that hurt. There's a lot of VeggieTales going on in our house lately, but this is what we're doing. This morning we're talking about Rack, Shack, and Benny, and the next time I come up, we'll probably talk about how God is bigger than the boogeyman. But in all seriousness, all jokes aside, I love this story. I want to go through it with you guys because, like Jonah, it's another one of those stories that we're told as children, and we never do really revisit this story, and we walk away from it with a childhood understanding. And we don't really revisit it until we have kids or grandkids of our own, and then we tell it in the same manner. And this is not a children's story. This is a very adult story with very adult themes. It was written by and for adults, so let's go through this as adults this morning. For those of you who are not familiar with the story, let's kind of, before we dive into the sermon, let's set up the plot. Most of you guys know Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They are Jews from the nation of Judah. This story does not take place in Judah, though. It takes place 500 miles away in this nation called Babylon. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are in Babylon because Babylon just conquered, invaded, plundered, pillaged. You get the picture. Their home capital of Jerusalem. And not only that, but they were taken against their will. And all this kind of takes place in the very beginning of Daniel chapter 1. But towards the end of chapter 1, they are installed as the king's counselors or wise men. So they live in the king's palace. And so you think, oh, that's not all that bad, until you realize who the king himself is. And his name is Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is a bit of a psychopath. He's got a fragile ego, a little emotionally unstable. He's a hothead. We are introduced to him in Daniel chapter 2, and this guy starts having dreams, and he doesn't really know what to do with them. And so he seeks the help of his wise men or his counselors. He says, "Guys, I need you to help me out. I don't really know what to make of these dreams." And they said, "Sure, man, just tell us the dream, and then we will interpret it for you." He says, "No, I'm not going to do that." And there's two reasons why he wouldn't have done that. One, because, well, he had a dream that disturbed him, but he can't really remember the dream. But he's still weirded out by the things that he can't remember. Everyone in here has been in those shoes before. The second reason is he wants an honest answer. He doesn't want them to tickle his ears with something that he would like to hear. He wants a legitimate answer to his problem. And so he says, if you're going to be legit about this, you're going to tell me the dream and its interpretation. And these guys say, "Man, we can't do that. This isn't how this works. You have to first tell us the dream, and then we can tell you what it means, but that's not how dreams work, buddy." And he says, "No, that's totally how dreams work. And this is totally how this situation is going to work. If you don't tell me the dream and its interpretation, I'm going to pull your arms and legs out of their sockets, and I'm going to beat your house into dust." See what I mean by little fragile ego? This is what life was like in Babylon. If the king woke up on the wrong side of the bed, he can make whatever ridiculous demand that he wanted to. And if you could not meet those demands, heads will literally roll. Or in this case, appendages, but you get the idea. And so, fortunately, for our three friends, they don't die that day. They actually get promoted through a story that's going to be saved for possibly another sermon later in the day. But Nebuchadnezzar's dream is interpreted, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they get promoted to all of the affairs. Basically, it's like second or third in command over all of Babylon. So they go from living a pretty cush life to having everything that them boys ever wanted. And so this brings us into Daniel chapter 3, which is where we're going to be reading this morning. And so before we dive in, Daniel 3 has some very dark and very disturbing vibes to it. But it's read in a very over-the-top, kind of mocking, sarcastic tone. People with dark humor are going to love this story, almost to the point where it's almost a little insensitive. And if you're reading in a New Living Translation this morning, you're not going to see this at all. If you read a more literal translation, like the ESV, which is what I'll be reading out of, or the King James, or the NASB, you're going to see this a little bit. But whenever you get into the original language, the sarcastic tone kind of comes through really strongly. It's going to be a little different than what you're used to with this story. So instead of me just trying to explain this story to you, let's just go ahead and read it, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. Daniel chapter 3, we'll start in verse 1, we'll go through verse 7. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits. And he set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent together the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all of the officials of the provinces to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and the herald proclaimed aloud, You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of, get ready, the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. Therefore, as soon as all the people heard the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, all peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So, did you guys catch that? Who was the one that set the image up? Okay, in a matter of 7 verses, the author has gone out of his way to repeat 6 different times that King Nebuchadnezzar has set this image up. What the author is doing, in my opinion, is he's mocking the over-the-top and ridiculous tone of his writing with that of Nebuchadnezzar's. So not only is the way that the story is written absolutely ridiculous, but the story itself is absolutely ridiculous. King Nebuchadnezzar, he sets this image up, and if you are a satrap, metrap, or an abendetrap in the nation of Babylon, whenever any kind of music starts playing, you are to bow down and worship this image. And if you don't, you're going to be thrown into a giant brick oven and cooked alive. It's a ridiculous story told in a very ridiculous way. And this repetition is all through chapter 3 this morning. So let's not focus on that. Let's take a moment and let's focus on this image. It says that this image was 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. Now, a lot of us Americans, we don't even like using the metric system. So cubits is something completely lost on us. So if you don't have your conversion charts in your Bible, that's roughly 90 foot tall and 9 foot wide. Really tall, really, really skinny. If you're still trying to get a mental image of what this thing might have looked like or how tall it was, I got you covered. This is the front of AK Acres, the workplace of our very own Dennis Kuhneman right here. And in between these 2 grain bins right here, there is an elevator that goes up and down that feeds those grain bins. If you take away the scaffolding from those grain elevators, dude is roughly 90 foot tall, 9 foot wide. Again, really tall, really, really skinny. And so next time you drive by AK Acres, look for this elevator and just imagine this giant golden statue of Dennis, and you've got an idea of what this thing would have looked like. Now, some of you might be thinking that this is just a cheap shot at Dennis, and it's not. I totally have a point to this. I know Dennis can take it, and we're buddies. I think. So if any of you guys were to drive by this statue, imaginary statue of Dennis, what would you think? You'd think, man, this guy is really full of himself. And that's not the case because that's not there. So we're not going to think that about Dennis. But it stands, you would see this and you would think, man, that guy is full of himself. And the point I'm trying to make is statues, they represent more than just the individual. They represent values and ideals and what you look forward to or what you imagine, the things that you think are good. Much like this 300-foot statue we have up in New York Harbor. If this was just a statue of a person, we wouldn't think nearly as high as this thing as we do. But with 4th of July coming around, this is a very treasured, sacred thing that we don't question because it has a value behind it. It's the Statue of Liberty. It represents freedom. Some of you don't know where I'm going with this. So before you start going all William Wallace on me and yelling freedom, this isn't all that bad. Okay, I promise. I'm not dogging on this at all. But I'm not saying it's all that good either, and it depends on how we as a people look at it. You see, whenever you take something that is good and you personify it and you deify it, and you don't question that, and you set that as the pinnacle of what you call good, that's when you start bowing down to an idol, an image. Let me clarify really quick. Let's take a break from this story and let's go down a rabbit trail because I really want to talk about what an image actually is this morning. Because see, as a kid, we're sitting in Sunday school and I was taught the 10 Commandments. And the first commandment was, no other gods before me. That's a really black and white thing. We're here at this church building, we're worshiping God. That one makes sense. But then you get to the second commandment and it's no idols or images. And this is where it starts to gray up, at least for me anyways. I don't know about you guys. Because you would, after church, we'd leave Sunday school and we would go out to eat at Chinese, maybe like the Ming Tree or something. And you would walk in the front door and you would see the golden, chubby little statue of Buddha, and you would think, that's bad. That's an idol. That's an image. That's no good. Okay, that's black and white. But then the next Sunday, you would go over to your grandma's house, and she would have the little porcelain statue of Jesus over in the corner, and you're thinking, well, technically, I think that's a statue, but it's of Jesus, so we can't really question it. But also, there's no clause in the second commandment that gives an exception to this rule, so we're just going to kind of leave that one alone. And then you'd go back to Sunday school, and they would say that, well, if you played PlayStation too much or you were on your phone too much, that was an idol and you need to take a break from it. And I never really worshipped the PlayStation. I would just, play it. And so you have this wide range of what everyone says an idol is, but they never did really clearly define it, at least to me anyways. So let's define what exactly an idol or an image is this morning. In the original language, which is Aramaic, but it also works in Hebrew, is the word Tsell. It's like our word seldom, but you add a T at the beginning and you drop the letter D in the middle of it. It's where I got the title of today's sermon. You guys probably thought that was Southern slang, but that's actually ancient Hebrew. And if you do a keyword for this word Tsell, it shows up in all over the Bible, not only in the 10 Commandments, but it actually shows up on the very first page of your Bible. If you flip to Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, God creates the world for the first 6 days, and then he creates man. And in verse 26, he says, let us make man in our image, in our Tsell, after our likeness, and let him have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. And so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. In the Old Testament, you always had to have, whatever God that you served, you had to have some kind of idol, some kind of representation of that God. But God, the one true God, he doesn't need any images. He doesn't need any idols because he already has them. It's us. It's me, and it's you, and it's the person sitting next to you. Does that make you feel good this morning? We are all walking, talking, breathing, laughing statues this morning. Does that make anybody feel uncomfortable? And it should, because we're not the greatest representations of God all the time. And it's what happened on the very next page in Genesis chapter 3. You see, God had went all throughout the world. He created the sky and the seas. We just learned about this in VBS. He created the skies and the skies and the seas, and then he created the land. And then he went about in each of those three areas creating birds and fish and land animals. And he called all of those things good. Thank you. And then he created man in his own image, and he called that very good. And so he said to his very good thing at the end of Genesis chapter 2, he said, you see that tree over there? That is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Don't eat from that tree. Just one rule, don't eat from that tree. You've got the whole rest of the world to rule and reign. Leave that one tree alone. It'll kill you. But we were deceived, and we broke the one rule that God gave us. And if the talking serpent wasn't enough of a red flag to give it away, what the talking serpent said was, hey, that's not going to kill you. That'll make you like God. What was already more like God than the people made in God's image who was ruling in God's place? It was a ridiculous thing to say, but we bought it, and we went up to that tree, we took its fruit from its branches, and then we ate it. And what we were saying in that moment is, God, I know your definition of good over here at the tree of knowledge of good and evil. I don't trust it. I've got reason to doubt you now. And so I want to be the one to decide what is good and evil on my own terms. We've been going through the book of Judges in Sunday school. If this sounds familiar, it's because it's a recurring theme, not only throughout Judges, but also throughout the Old Testament just in general. And we're already in God's place. You know, we'll kind of cut him out. We'll be the ones to decide what's good and evil. We'll be even more like God than we already were. We're stepping into the shoes of our Creator. And whenever we make an image, what we're doing is we're cementing ourselves in God's shoes. Because God made us in his image, and now we're trying to make stuff in our own. And so this is exactly, I think, what happens in Nebuchadnezzar. He puts up an image or a Tsell of himself that he can manipulate and control. And this is how he controls all of Babylon to bow down to him. Just like the Statue of Liberty, it represented more than just Nebuchadnezzar himself. It represented probably the thing that Nebuchadnezzar thought was good: Babylon's power, its wealth, its authority, and its ability to strike fear into everyone who did not bow down to this image. Does that make sense to everyone? Is everyone on the same page as far as what an image is? Throw your hands up like this if you still don't know. Okay, good. So let's take this opportunity to jump back into Daniel, because this is where the plot starts to thicken just a little bit. In verse 8, it says that, therefore, at a certain time, Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, they shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. What they're doing is they're just repeating the terms and conditions to the king that they were just told. And then they tag on, well, there's certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Namely, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Even though they're second in command, they pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods, nor worship the golden image that you have set up. These guys aren't setting a good example. And this makes King Nebuchadnezzar pretty mad. Verse 13, Nebuchadnezzar in a furious rage commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, if you fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. We're just going to sweep this under the rug. Nothing else is going to be said. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. So King Nebuchadnezzar has Rakshak and Benny brought before him, and he repeats these terms and conditions before these guys. It's like a giant game of telephone here. But look at what he tags on here at the very end. He says, who is the God that will deliver you out of my hand? This guy has put himself in the shoes of God. Did you see that? Essentially what he's telling these guys is, look, I just destroyed your hometown on your home field, and your God wasn't much help to you there, was he? Now you're at my house. You're in an away game. Do you think your God's going to be much help to you here? So either you bow down to me right now, or I'm going to do to you what I just did to your home country. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they have a master class in how to answer bullies. They say, "O King Nebuchadnezzar," in verse 16, "we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." In the most polite way possible, these guys do not address the terms and conditions at all. They said, "Hey, we're not going to argue with you over this. The terms and conditions have been read plenty of times now. We didn't scroll to the bottom and hit accept like everyone else does. We've memorized them by now. But here's the thing. We're guilty on that. But at the very end right there, you said, 'Who is the God that will rescue you out of my hand?' Our God totally can, if he wants to. But if he doesn't, just know it's not because he's mean, and it's not because we failed to impress him somehow. You see, we don't control our God because we're not God ourselves, and neither are you. You know, you've set this giant image up here because you want people to see you in a certain way. And we're second in command over all of Babylon. We see you behind the scenes, and this image that you have set up of yourself, it doesn't fit the description of you. We know you. This is not you, and we're not bowing down to this, or we're not serving the gods whom you think gave you this position." Again, the most polite, conscientious objectors of all time. And this makes Nebuchadnezzar furious. Verse 19 says, "Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated, and he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. And because the king's order was so urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace." You guys are not laughing right now. And it's not because I have just a weird, wicked sense of humor. I mean, sometimes I do, but in this case, this is intentional. There hasn't been a whole lot of laughing throughout this, but I'm about to give you the key to unlock the author's tone. In verse 19, it says, "King Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed." Right here, the expression of his face. What was the word that you think they used to say that? I'll give you one guess. His Tsell. He was filled with fury, and his Tsell was changed. Now, not his giant golden statue that he uses to represent himself, his own personal image. It's a pun. It's a play on words. Every dad in here should be laughing right now. The author is inserting this little joke because he doesn't take Nebuchadnezzar seriously. This guy puts up this giant statue, and this giant statue is how he controls all of Babylon to worship him. But because the 3 most polite men that you've ever met are sitting over here, he can't control these men, and because he can't control these men, he loses control of his own Tsell. And you think, I still don't buy that. That's still a little dark, still a little disturbing. Seems like a really inappropriate time to tell a joke. And I get that. The author does not take Nebuchadnezzar seriously at all, and he's inviting us to do the same. Like a child with an imagination that gets the best of him, King Nebuchadnezzar has let his imagination get the best of him. And through the rest of this passage right here, everything that unfolds is just chaotic and super sloppy. And this giant show of power, Nebuchadnezzar says, I'll show you guys. And so he gets the strongest men of his army to come and tie up the 3 most polite guys that you've ever met. And then he has his brick kiln heated 7 times hotter than it's usually heated. And so on the way up, the strongest men in his army, they catch fire, they die, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're kind of still tied up at the moment, and they just kind of fumble their way into this giant furnace. And that's our scripture for today. And you may think, well, hold on, that's not the end of the story. Chapter 3 isn't over, and you're right, but this is where we're going to stop today. And it may bother you that we're not coming to the end of the tale for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but it's because we're taught that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are the main characters of this story. And the moral for this story that we're supposed to collect is, how to be fearless in times of persecution. And that's a moral, but I don't think it's the main point. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they have 3 sentences in Daniel chapter 3. They're briefly mentioned in Daniel chapter 1 and 2, and then they disappear from the Bible. They're not mentioned anywhere else. And so if that's not a side character or a supporting role, I don't know what is. Daniel 3 is not a story of how to live fearlessly in times of persecution. Daniel 3 is a character study, specifically on Nebuchadnezzar, but it's what happens whenever we make an image and how we behave whenever that image is made. So this isn't a 3-point sermon today. I have just 1 point, so it should be hopefully fairly easy. What is your Tsell today? What is your image? And again, I'm not talking about the little chubby statue of Buddha at the Chinese restaurant. I'm not talking about your garden gnome out front. What is this image that you want everybody to see you as? This image that, it's your idea of what you consider the way you should be, but you can't live up to it. And so you have to kind of manipulate everyone else's perspective to see you in the way that you should be. Let me repeat that. I'm not talking about the gold. I'm not talking about the little porcelain statue. Forget about that. This own image that you have in your life, the way you want to be perceived, but you can't maybe live up to that standard that you set for yourself. And so you get other people to perceive you in a way that you're really not. I'll list just a couple of examples. Maybe your identity, maybe your image is in success. You want to be seen as this really successful hard worker. And to be fair, you probably already are. But you strive to outwork yourself day after day after day because you don't want to be perceived as a lazy person. And so you become a slave to this image to the point where you feel empty and useless if you don't have just a little bit of chaos in your life at every turn. Maybe you want to be seen as a good person, right? You want to be seen as that really disciplined churchgoer. And so to make sure that everyone else is on the same page as you talk yourself up every chance that you get. You tell everyone how good you are as a person, how you visited the old folks' home, all the good deeds that you've done, just how lucky you are as an individual in general. And even at the extreme point, you may do that maybe even by tearing other people down at the same time to really draw that distinction there. Just like Nebuchadnezzar did to his loyal soldiers who were really just following orders, they died to protect their king's image. And if you keep reading, Nebuchadnezzar really only got up out of his chair whenever he realized that his plan was not going the way that he anticipated it to go. So hopefully we aren't literally sacrificing people in brick ovens, but who is that person lately that you have stepped on to keep maintaining your image? You saw your thing is more important than their thing, and so you walked right over it. Who's the black sheep of your family? Everybody's got one. Don't even pretend like you don't. Who's the black sheep of your family that's either the butt of everyone's joke or who's the subject of every concerned conversation that you try to pass off as loving, but really you're just talking smack? Was there ever anyone that called you out because what you said and what you did, how you are as a person, they didn't really line up. And so you may lose your temper with them and treat them in a way that violates their dignity. Maybe your identity isn't in success at all. Maybe your Tsell or your image is in failure. Whether it's in past mistakes or even current day circumstances, you see yourself as a victim. And so one day you open up yourself to someone very close to you, because it hurts to kind of keep all this stuff bottled up. And that person, they heap affection on you, not because they feel sorry for you, but because they genuinely love and they care about you as a person. And that feels really, really good. And so you misinterpret that, and then you go and you insert yourself into every conversation within a 6-foot radius of you, telling everyone how sorry and hard your life is, how poor you are. Maybe you think that you're ugly. I don't care what this situation is, but you victimize yourself in every interaction that you have. And you can go on and on with these examples of images. It's not just success or failure. Maybe it's how much money you make, what color tractor you drive, how skinny or unskinny that you are, and that kind of takes all of your attention. Maybe it's what sports team that you watch. Maybe it's, your old high school records that you set, and now some punk kid has come along and beat those, and so now we have to kind of live vicariously through our children so they can redeem the family's honor. We can go on and on and on with these images, but we all have these images that we worship. And you may say this morning, you say, Brett, you're a really nice guy. You don't know what it's like to be living in a small town, though, and be raised here. You always have to have an image up. You always have to have this barrier between you and the outside world, because if you're genuine and you open yourself up and you make yourself vulnerable, they're going to maliciously treat you harshly like the Babylonians did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So just calm it down just a little. I'll agree to that just a little bit, but I've got some family back here in the back. You don't have to raise your hands, guys. Don't worry. After service, if you don't believe me this morning, go back and ask them. Just say, this is all the ways in which we suffer with image. Do you guys have anything like that back home? And they'll say, how long do you have? We're from the Bible Belt. If there's anybody that has an image that we have to maintain, it's us. Guys, this isn't just a Bible Belt issue. It's not just a small town issue. This is an issue that we've had since the very beginning. Go back to the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. Whenever they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and they took that first bite, what happened? One, they realized they were naked, but they were filled with all these inner insecurities. Did they address those inner insecurities? No, they changed their outward appearance to cover up what was actually going on. We've literally been suffering from this since the very beginning. And you may say, dude, I just want to be a good steward of what God has given me. Is that such a bad thing to do? No, that's awesome. I'm super proud of you. You're doing what you were literally designed to do. Go back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. But that's not your problem. If we have a problem today, it's being a better steward of ourselves than of God. And here's the really, really scary part. If we're doing this with each other, if we're putting this image up where we're changing people's perception of ourselves and not being truly genuine on the inside, if we do this enough, chances are we're doing the exact same thing with God and we don't realize it. And He's going to see through it every time. We just went through 1 Samuel not too long ago. So 1 Samuel 16, verse 7, Samuel was looking for the next king. And he goes to David's family, and he sees David's older brother. And God says, hey, don't look on his appearance or the height of his stature, because I've rejected him. The Lord sees not as man sees, because man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. If our image of being a good person is how well we can represent ourselves to the rest of the world, even though it may be true and it may not be true, if that's solely our definition of good, we're going to stand condemned just like Adam and Eve did in the garden. But in that moment, God gave Adam and Eve hope. He said, guys, there's going to come a guy one day who's going to reverse course and get us back to this ideal in Eden where we can look at each other face to face. And his name is Jesus. And Paul told us all about Jesus. In one of his letters to the Philippians, Paul says that even though he was in the form of God, he didn't count equality with God as a thing to be grasped. Jesus emptied himself, and he took the form of a servant. Being born in the what? In the likeness of man. God bore our image. He put his image to the side, and he took on our old, nasty, rotten, deceptive image. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient. He didn't trust in this image's definition of good. He humbled himself and trusted in God's definition of good and went to the tree of life. There was two trees. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death. And not just any death, but a really painful death. God came down, he bore our image, and then he nailed it to that cross right here, like the one behind me, along with himself, and they both died. Paul says if you want to follow in Jesus' footsteps this morning, over in Ephesians chapter 4, Paul says, put off your old self. Die to yourself right now. That belongs to your former manner of life. It's corrupt through its deceitful desires. Leave it up there. Stop trying to cover yourself with this old, nasty, rotten, mangled image. But instead, be renewed in the spirit of your minds and put on the new self created after the what? The likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. God is giving us a do-over on the whole Garden of Eden narrative right here. We've already had this tree right here, and it didn't really get us anywhere good. We thought it would, but it didn't. And now God is giving us a second chance to eat from the tree of life, who is personified in Jesus this morning. Not only have we been created in God's image, but he says that we've been recreated because of what Jesus did for us. Because Jesus raised from the dead, he defeated death, so can we. And we could live through that one hope. No matter what you're a slave of today, no matter what image you are a slave of, whether it's one that you've made yourself or one that someone else has decided that you should have, that you feel kind of trapped in, I want to let you know that this morning, you're all made in God's image. We're about to sing a song called Living Hope. If you believe that you can die to, if you've got this image that you can die to it, and if you believe that, join with me in singing this and become the people that we were made to be by bearing God's image and trusting in his definition of good. I'm going to pray us out here. God, as we come before you today, thank you. Thank you for not leaving us to decide what is good and evil on our own terms. God, we don't deserve your love, but you give it to us. And you give it to us by dying to yourself. And so, whether we know what image we have that we put forward in front of everyone, or whether we think that we're good on this, would you show us this image that we suffer from? Whether someone else tells us or you, Lord God, we love you because you loved us first. Stand up as we sing about our living hope.